I've had these terrariums sitting in my closet for a little while now, and today I finally decided to use them. This middle one will be by far the most challenging, so without further ado, let's get started. First order of business is to make a false bottom. I'll be using some simple black sand as well as a little paper funnel that I made. This will help reduce the mess and make sure that I get all of the sand into the containers. I added a layer about 1/3 of an inch thick. Repeated this process with all 3 terrariums. The second terrarium had another one inside of it that I also had to fill. It's hard to see here, but the false bottom is level in both areas. The next thing I'll do is make a mesh barrier. I set the terrariums onto the mesh and proceeded to cut around them. I should mention that I cut them slightly larger than the base of the terrarium so that they fold up on the edge and create a better barrier. After cutting the barrier, I inserted it into the terrarium. It took a little bit of work to get it to sit in place, but eventually I got it. Again, I repeated this process with the other 2 terrariums. The second one was significantly more difficult as I had to account for the middle area. I had to cut out a little circle in the middle as well as a slit on one of the sides so I could get it around the middle. It was also difficult because of the limited space, but eventually I got it done. The next thing I need to do is add the substrate using this funnel. This is just a typical ABG mix. As I figured, the funnel didn't work the best, so I ended up just pouring it into the terrariums. It was a bit messy, but it got the job done. I added a layer to each terrarium that's about 1/2 of an inch thick. Although there will be a few plants in here, the majority of it will be moss, so it doesn't need a whole lot of substrate. Normally before adding the substrate I would add something like charcoal or activated carbon, but I didn't have any at the time and wasn't able to get any soon enough. Anyway, I decided with the second terrarium that I wanted the middle area elevated. Here are all the terrariums filled with substrate. I think they'll look pretty good, but they'll look even better with some moss. This moss to be specific. Nothing fancy here, just a good variety. Anyway, I started to add them to the terrariums. Like I said, there will be a few plants in these, but the majority of them is going to be moss, so I wanted to make sure I had a good variety. I used various tools and techniques to get the moss in place. This first one was a little bit difficult because of the small opening, but I have a feeling it's only going to get harder from here. Anyway, like with every other step, I repeated it with both of the other terrariums. Now it's time to take on the second one. This was extremely difficult, and again, I had to use a variety of tools and technique to get the moss in place. Even so, I wasn't able to get it looking perfect, but I think I did a pretty good job given the space restrictions. I also added some moss to the middle area. I won't add any plants or hardscape here, so this will be it for that. Anyway, with all the terrariums covered in moss, here's what we're looking like. I think it's coming along amazing. What do you think? The next step is the hardscape. This will help bring a little bit of color and texture variation to the terrariums. Again, it's very hard to work in these small spaces, so I did the best I could with the materials I had. Honestly, the 2 harder ones are the scapes that I ended up liking the most. This one I'm particularly fond of. I tried to use a variety of hardscape materials, but unfortunately I only had one kind of stone at the time. However, the wood I was able to do that. This terrarium had a slope in the back, so I tried to play into that using the hardscape. I wanted to make a sort of rocky hill. Luckily I was able to, as the opening in this one is quite a bit bigger than the others. And yet again comes the challenging one. There wasn't a whole lot I could do with this one, besides just throw some things down. However, I tried to move them to get a scape that looked nice. This is probably the most difficult terrarium I've ever worked with, but honestly I enjoyed it. There's something about challenging my abilities that I just find satisfying. One other thing I decided to add was a few leftover botanicals. I put them in the terrariums where I feel they fit the best. I think they really helped in the second terrarium as I was able to move them around a little bit more. This helped kind of extend the scape and make the whole thing feel a little more full. The last thing I need to do to bring these to life is add a few pieces of ivy. I've found it to be a great plant for these small terrariums as it doesn't grow very big or fast and it seems to thrive. It took me about 15 minutes to get it in the second terrarium alone, but honestly I was really happy with the result and it ended up being my favorite terrarium. From the start I had wanted some kind of stand to set these on, but I couldn't find anything until I remembered I had this slate stone that worked perfectly. This made the whole thing feel like one piece and really brought everything together. Although this is one of the most simple projects I think I've ever made, it's surprisingly one of my favorites. I can't explain it, but something about this project just captivates me. I absolutely love how it turned out. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Anyway, that's going to do it for this one. I know it was a bit of a smaller project, but honestly I really enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.